if you go back to like the gold rush of the 1800s in San Francisco, the people that made the money were the platform enablers, right? They were the ones that sold the picks, the shovels, the pans, and the jeans, right? And that's where Levi Strauss was born. The equivalence in that analogy today is NVIDIA, because they are the dominant pick and shovel provider. So the question is, well, what are we going to use these picks and shovels to create? Are we going to find gold? And I think the question is unclear. And where will that gold be found? Will it be found inside of a big tech company, or will it be found inside of a startup? If you look inside of where these resources are being used inside of big tech, it is to completely scorch the earth on the economic value of large models. And I think that that's very, very good for all of the startups that come after it. So what do I mean by this? We were all so wrapped around the axle around ChatGPT and then GPT in general. And now, if you look at the quality of Llama 2, basically these big companies have decided, no, we're just going to make all these models extremely good, extremely useful, and very, very free. And so a lot of the resources are going there to economically subsidize, and by implication, economically destroy the value of that category. That's going to be good for startups. And so the question is, what will you then build on top of these quasi-free, almost free tools? And so one area that I have been looking at for a while is in computational biology. I think that clip that you're talking about was just me talking with Oren Zeev, just around the ability to compute large complex spaces with very sparse information. It's a very difficult task today, but tomorrow in an AI model that you can train, you can literally characterize every single molecular permutation you could imagine. You combine it with something like AlphaFold, and you can understand protein folding, and all of a sudden you can sequentially start to put tools together that could theoretically give you much higher probability guessing for specific compounds that could actually cure disease. A different version of that is a company that myself and a few other people started. I tweeted that out, which is more in the material science space. And we've had some pretty important breakthroughs there, which is really about trying to invent next generation battery materials. And we have one candidate that could be pretty revolutionary if it turns out to work. We don't know yet. Some positive signs. So there are some of these green shoots. So my perspective is that a lot of the money that NVIDIA makes today is going to be money well spent, because it'll be going to the big guys, big tech plus Tesla. They are then going to create some really foundational platform technologies with it, whether it's Dojo, whether it's FSD, whether it's the full platform inside of Tesla that is the cameras plus the inference plus the training for all forms of physical world interaction, whether it's Llama 2. And all of that stuff will be given away essentially, I think, open source, quasi-free to the ecosystem over the next few years. And I think that'll be a really important moment, which will create hundreds of new companies doing really clever, cool things. So we haven't yet seen the big breakout company yet. And so I think that right now, most of this CapEx is going to the big guys, but the dividends of all the work that these big guys are doing will be seen over the next few years in the startups that get started in the next 4 or 5 years.
I love the California analogy. Ultimately, what all that prospecting for gold did was create the state of California, putting aside the Levi's and the jeans. And if you know anything about California's GDP, it would be, I think these statistics are always talked about, 5th, 10th, 8th largest. It has a bigger GDP, California, than some of the largest countries in the world. So this is a 2015 chart. It's hard to find the updated information on this, but ultimately that was the product of the gold rush, is this incredible state. Any other thoughts on NVIDIA before we move on to ARM?
I think OpenAI had a potentially significant product announcement that's related to this. So they just launched fine-tuning for ChatGPT, actually version 3.5 Turbo. It says here, fine-tuning lets you train the model on your company's data and run it at scale. Early tests have shown that fine-tuned GPT 3.5 can match or exceed GPT-4 on narrow tasks. So you can do things like fine-tune the formatting of the output. You can fine-tune the tone. Fine-tuning also allows businesses to make the model follow instructions better. So I think the point of this is that we're still at such an early stage of this, and there are so many applications that are going to be developed, and they're making the models more and more useful. So, Jason, to your analogy about fiber, what happened with fiber is there was a big build out of overcapacity, but then the number of applications kept growing until that capacity got used. And I think we're probably going to see something like that here, where there is a big build out going on of capacity and capabilities, and that's going to lead to the next generation of applications. And I just think we don't know yet what the steady state of either demand or supply for these chips is going to be. Obviously, the market got taken by surprise over the last year. So you've seen, again, this huge spike in demand. The supply cannot react fast enough. That's led to gigantic profits for NVIDIA. But it's hard to know exactly, again, what is the steady state going to be? Is it going to be like this, or is this a one-time spike? And we also don't know what the supply will be once the manufacturers all adjust, because now they know that the demand is there.
And to your point, like the big use cases are pushing us well past chips to really be more like entire systems and these racks. And so if you look like at Grace Hopper, which is their next gen design, it's like a bunch of chiplets plus memory on a huge board. It's not a chip. You're talking about system level manufacturing at this point. And that will also create different kinds of use cases. Because, for example, today, right now, when you look at simple things like probabilistic tasks, I think ChatGPT and all these GPTs are pretty marvelous and pretty inspirational. But deterministic tasks, they're shit. Like, they hallucinate on simple things like multiplication. Why? Because you infer multiplication and you try to calculate it probabilistically and you get these simple math functions wrong. And so these are all these things where the software has to become more and more sophisticated and actually be able to path and tunnel code into different ways of getting it executed and then bringing it back and stitching it together. All of these things don't exist. Those are very rudimentary things that were solved in V1 of compute. So I think that, to your point, David, like, we don't know where this goes. We're probably going to go to a place that it's not just about chips, but it's about systems. But that's going to create this weird balkanization almost. And I think that's where a lot of the profit margins will get eroded away, because that will make it a much more competitive industry. And there just isn't a lot of margin to capture when you actually stitch all these things together.
Yeah. And if you think about what were the massive wins for all that extra fiber, it was really two companies. The first was YouTube, which stopped charging people for transport on their videos. Before that, if you had a video go viral, your server got shut down because you hit your $5,000 a month limit or whatever you had set with your ISP. And then Netflix, of course, right? Netflix couldn't exist, and all that dark fiber built that. So we'll see with all this extra GPU, what could happen. And to your point about the breakthroughs there, you can now go into your ChatGPT and you can put in custom instructions. And so it asks you, what would you like ChatGPT to know about you and to provide better responses? And, for example, I told it I'm a venture capitalist. I live in the Bay Area. I'm looking for concise business information. And then it says, well, how would you like ChatGPT to respond? And I said, I like to see data in a table. I like to see data in those tables with hyperlinks. I like citations when possible.
Yeah, just to be clear, what you're describing with custom instructions, that was a feature I think they launched like a month or two ago.
A couple weeks.
What that is doing is prompt engineering, basically.
Yes.
It's pre-saving like all that preamble that you would have to put in every single one of your prompts.
Yep.
Whereas this fine-tuning, as I understand it, is more about fine-tuning the model to improve
set.
the model for a certain kind of data or certain kind of output.
Right. So the example there would be if you had your email box or you had your Google Docs or you had a repository of all your Slack messages or something in your company, you had your company handbooks or, all of Chamath's letters he writes every year, you could have that uploaded to ChatGPT.
It's potentially very powerful, I think, for enterprises. I think the big enterprise use case, the most obvious one, is that every enterprise wants its own internal chatbot. It wants its own internal ChatGPT, where the employees can ask questions and the AI has access to all of the company's information and it understands permissions and privacy. So it only reveals information to people who have the right to see it. That's kind of a tall order, but I think that's what the market wants.
Yeah.
They want the ChatGPT for the company intranet.
Yes. And so
I think there's a lot of people racing to provide that. And there was an interesting tweet by Nathan Benach. Anyway, he just said, bye a bunch of startups. Because I guess a lot of startups were working on this fine-tuning problem. That may be too glib a reaction.
It's way too glib.
Because I think there's just a lot of enterprises who do not want to share all of their corporate information with OpenAI.